The biting November air whipped around the 68th floor balcony, but Olivia Miller didn't flinch. She stood in her simple, dark grey uniform, a stark silhouette against the glittering tapestry of Manhattan. Her hands were clasped behind her back, her posture ramrod straight, a quiet, unyielding defiance that seemed to absorb the city's endless noise and render it silent. Across from her, leaning against the cold glass railing, was Ethan Thorne. His bespoke suit, worth more than she made in a year, was immaculate, but a single dark lock of hair had fallen across his forehead, betraying a crack in his usually impenetrable composure. His jaw was a tight, hard line. His grey eyes, the colour of a gathering storm, were fixed on hers, searching for something he couldn't name. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a chasm filled with unspoken words, with the weight of 1,000 tiny moments that had led them to this impossible precipice. How had she, the woman who moved through his life as silently as a shadow, come to be the one person who could make the unshakable Ethan Thorne look so utterly lost? How had the invisible hand that organized his world become the one thing that could unravel it completely? But to understand how they arrived here, at this charged standoff between a billionaire and his domestic assistant, high above a city that didn't care, we have to go back. We have to rewind 3 weeks to a time when the silence between them was not a weapon, but a comfortable, unspoken language. 3 weeks earlier, Olivia Miller's world was one of meticulous order and profound invisibility. Her alarm went off at precisely 4:30 in the morning, long before the sun even considered gracing the New York skyline. By 6, she was stepping into the private elevator that ascended to Ethan Thorne's penthouse, a sprawling monument to minimalist wealth that occupied the top 2 floors of Thorne Tower. The space was a symphony of glass, chrome, and polished marble, a place so pristine it felt less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to the concept of loneliness. Olivia was its curator. Her job was to erase any trace of human imperfection. She moved through the cavernous rooms with a practiced, silent grace, her presence marked only by the results of her labor. At 6:05, the Gaggia espresso machine would hum to life, brewing the single-origin Sumatran coffee Ethan favored. At 6:15, his collection of bespoke suits, arranged by color and fabric weight, would be steamed, a single choice for the day laid out on the valet stand in his cavernous closet. At 7, a copy of the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times would be placed on the massive oak desk in his home office, perfectly aligned with the edge. She was a ghost, a whisper of efficiency. In the first year of her employment, Olivia wasn't sure Ethan Thorne even knew her name. He was a presence, not a person, a low murmur of a voice on a conference call from behind a closed door, the faint scent of expensive cologne in the hallway, the sharp, decisive click of his shoes on the marble floor as he left for the day. He was Thorne Global, the tech empire he had inherited and ruthlessly expanded. He was a name in headlines, a figure of intimidating intellect and legendary reclusiveness. For Olivia, this distance was a shield. Her life outside these sterile, beautiful walls was a quiet battle. Rent for her small apartment in Queens was a constant worry, and her younger sister's college tuition was a mountain she was determined to climb, one meticulously cleaned countertop at a time. She'd learned early that to survive in a city built on power and status, the best strategy for someone like her was to be impeccable, reliable, and utterly forgettable. If you've ever felt like your hard work goes completely unseen, like you're just a pair of hands instead of a person with a heart, take a second to hit that like button, because Olivia's quiet dignity deserves to be recognized. She poured her pride not into being seen, but into the flawlessness of her work. She found a strange satisfaction in the perfect gleam of a window overlooking Central Park, in the serene order of a bookshelf, in bringing a quiet, livable peace to a space that its owner was too busy to inhabit. But then, things began to shift, not with a bang, but with a series of almost imperceptible tremors. It started with the orchids. Ethan kept a collection of rare white phalaenopsis orchids in his office, their delicate petals a stark, organic contrast to the cold technology surrounding them. The florist was supposed to care for them, but Olivia noticed they were beginning to wilt, their leaves drooping with a silent thirst. On a whim, she looked up their specific care instructions, mixing a precise solution of filtered water and nutrients. She began tending to them herself, a small, secret act of nurturing in a home devoid of it. A week later, she walked past his office and saw him standing by the window, his finger gently tracing the edge of a newly vibrant, healthy leaf. He didn't see her, but she saw the look on his face, a flicker of something soft, a quiet wonder that momentarily erased the ruthless CEO. The next tremor was the tea. Olivia knew Ethan often worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and sheer force of will. She'd see the evidence the next morning, the discarded cups, the dense reports left open on his desk. One evening, knowing he was facing a grueling deadline, she did something she had never done before. She brewed a pot of chamomile tea, its gentle scent a stark contrast to the bitter aroma of his coffee. She poured it into a simple ceramic mug, one of the few in the kitchen that wasn't part of a severe minimalist set, and left it on the corner of his desk with a small note that simply said, "For later." She was gone before he saw it, her heart pounding with the audacity of the gesture. The next morning, the mug was in the sink, washed. Nothing was said, but a new routine was born. On nights he worked late, the tea would appear. It was never acknowledged, but it was always gone by morning. It was a language of gestures, a conversation held in silence. Olivia started noticing the books on his nightstand, dense biographies, impenetrable texts on quantum computing. They looked untouched, more like props than possessions. One day, while dusting, she replaced a thick volume on market theory with a worn paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from her own bag. It was a risk, a crossing of a line she had so carefully drawn. For 3 days, the book sat there, a silent challenge. On the fourth morning, she found it on his nightstand with a bookmark placed neatly 1/3 of the way through. The small, paper rectangle felt like a shout in the quiet penthouse. Ethan Thorne was a man who processed the world in data and algorithms. His life was a series of calculated outcomes. Olivia Miller was an anomaly he couldn't quantify. He started to watch her, not with the detached gaze of an employer, but with the focused curiosity of a cryptographer trying to solve a code. He noticed the way her brow furrowed in concentration when she polished the silver, the quiet hum of a song she would sometimes murmur when she thought she was alone, the way she would pause to look at the sunset from his floor-to-ceiling windows. Her expression a mix of awe and melancholy. These were small human details in a life he had deliberately stripped of them. He began to realize that the warmth he had started to feel in his own home wasn't from the state-of-the-art climate control system. It was emanating from her. The illusion of their separate worlds, however, was still firmly in place. He was Ethan Thorne, the billionaire. She was Olivia Miller, the help. They were two celestial bodies orbiting the same sun of his wealth, but existing in completely different galaxies. The chasm between them seemed as vast and uncrossable as the one between his balcony and the distant streets below. But the universe has a funny way of collapsing distances you believe are infinite. One late afternoon, Ethan was on a particularly brutal video conference call, his voice cold and clipped as he dismantled a rival company's proposal. He was in his element, a predator efficient and merciless. The faces on the screen in front of him were a gallery of intimidated executives. "Your projections are not just optimistic," Ethan was saying, his tone cutting like glass. "They are a work of fiction. Rerun the numbers and come back to me when you decide to join reality." As he delivered the final, crushing blow, he saw a movement in his peripheral vision. It was Olivia, quietly entering the office to place the now customary mug of chamomile tea on his desk. She moved without a sound, her focus entirely on the simple task, ensuring the mug was placed just so, on a coaster, its handle turned towards him. The contrast between the raw, corporate savagery of his meeting and this simple, unsolicited act of kindness struck him with the force of a physical blow. The two worlds collided right there, on the polished surface of his oak desk. The scent of chamomile mixed with the electric tension of a multi-billion-dollar conquest. He saw it all in that one fleeting moment, his cold, empty victory and her quiet, unassuming grace. He abruptly ended the call, leaving a dozen executives staring at a blank screen. The penthouse was suddenly, deafeningly silent, save for the faint whisper of steam rising from the mug. He stared at it, not as a beverage, but as a symbol, a question he didn't know how to ask, from a woman he was beginning to realize he didn't know at all. And in that moment, Ethan Thorne understood that the most valuable asset in his entire portfolio was the one he couldn't acquire, couldn't control, and was terrified of losing. The silence of the penthouse was a living thing. It was a dense, heavy presence that clung to the Italian marble floors and the vast floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Manhattan skyline like a captive god. 3 weeks before their confrontation on the balcony, this silence was Olivia Miller's primary companion. Her work was a quiet ballet of precision and care, performed in a world that wasn't hers. Each morning at precisely 5:30, she would let herself into the sprawling residence, the click of the lock echoing in the grand, empty space. She moved with a practiced grace, her soft-soled shoes making no sound as she navigated the museum-like corridors of Ethan Thorne's life. Her first task was always the coffee. Not just any coffee, but a single-origin Ethiopian blend, ground to a specific coarseness, brewed via a pour-over method at exactly 94 degrees Celsius. Ethan Thorne, she had learned, was a man of meticulous, unyielding routines. He was less a person and more a series of complex algorithms that governed his existence. Her job was to be the invisible, flawless code that ran in the background, ensuring his primary functions operated without a single glitch. She would place the steaming black coffee on a slate coaster beside his laptop in the home office, a room that felt more like a command center for a small nation than a place of work. She would then retreat, her presence erased, long before he emerged from his bedroom at 6:15. Olivia's life was a study in contrasts. Here she handled $1,000 vases and polished surfaces that reflected a sky filled with corporate jets. After her shift, she would descend 52 floors back to the real world, taking the crowded downtown train to a small fifth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that never truly slept. She was the sole provider for her younger sister, who was fighting her way through nursing school, and every dollar Olivia earned was meticulously budgeted. The weight of that responsibility was a constant, quiet pressure in her chest, a silent motivator that pushed her to be perfect, to be indispensable, to be invisible. If you've ever felt the weight of the world on your shoulders like Olivia does, show some love and hit that like button. Let her know she's not alone. Her dignity was her armor. She took pride in her work, in the quiet order she brought to a life of chaotic power. She knew Ethan barely registered her as a person. She was a function, a service, and that was safe. But then small things began to happen. Unscripted moments. Ethan had been working for 3 days straight, fueled by coffee and a cold, ruthless focus on a hostile takeover. Olivia could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders as he paced the office on yet another brutal conference call. That evening, on her own initiative, she brewed a cup of chamomile tea with a touch of honey and left it on his desk after he'd finally retreated to his room. It was a simple human gesture, an impulse she couldn't explain. She expected him to ignore it, or for it to be gone in the morning, cleared by the overnight cleaning crew. The next day, the empty mug was placed carefully to the side of his desk, not discarded in the trash. It was a tiny acknowledgement, a crack in the monolith of his indifference. Ethan, for his part, had been perplexed by the tea. He didn't drink tea, it wasn't part of his routine, yet he had found himself drinking it. The warmth, a strange, unwelcome comfort in the sterile silence of his night. It was an anomaly in his perfectly curated data set, and it unsettled him. He started watching her, not overtly, but through the subtle changes in his environment. He noticed the way a wilting orchid in the living room was suddenly vibrant and healthy. He noticed a new book on his nightstand, a worn paperback of a classic novel he'd mentioned enjoying in a rare offhand magazine interview years ago. He hadn't even remembered saying it, but she had. These gestures were like whispers in the oppressive quiet of his home. They were pieces of a person he had never bothered to see, a quiet intelligence and a deep-seated kindness that operated without seeking credit or reward. For a man who measured every interaction in terms of leverage and value, her unsolicited decency was a foreign language he couldn't comprehend, yet was becoming desperate to understand. He found himself looking for her, his eyes scanning the vast apartment for a glimpse of her quiet form as she polished glass or arranged cushions. He began to see the grace in her movements, the gentle focus in her expression. She wasn't just an employee, she was a presence, a warmth that was slowly, imperceptibly, filling the vast, lonely spaces of his life. The outside world, however, remained as cruel and calculating as ever. One afternoon, a video call from his mother, Eleanor Thorne, interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor was a formidable woman, a matriarch forged in the fires of old money and social strategy. Her face appeared on his screen, perfectly coiffed and radiating a cool, aristocratic disapproval. "Ethan, darling," she began, her voice smooth as silk but laced with steel. "I saw the preliminary guest list for the gala. It's adequate, but I trust you'll be bringing a suitable date. The van der Sloot's daughter just returned from Switzerland. She's perfect. Think of the optics." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mother, I'm not concerned with optics." "You should be," she sniffed, her eyes darting to something over his shoulder. "Is that the help? Make sure she uses the service elevator, Ethan. We can't have the staff mixing with guests when I visit next week. It's unseemly." He glanced back. Olivia was in the far corner of the living room, carefully dusting a sculpture, completely oblivious to the conversation. She was the picture of quiet dignity, a stark contrast to his mother's cold, transactional view of the world. A sudden, protective anger flared within him. "Her name is Olivia," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "And she is more competent than your entire committee put together." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Don't be sentimental, Ethan. It's a weakness. Remember who you are. Remember what we've built." The call ended, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. His mother's words highlighted the chasm, not just between him and Olivia, but between the world he was expected to inhabit and the small, quiet moments of humanity he was beginning to crave. Later that evening, he walked out of his office to find Olivia about to leave for the day. She was standing by the door, pulling on a simple coat. Their eyes met across the vast expanse of the living room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence that had once been empty and cold now crackled with a new unspoken tension. In her eyes, he didn't see an employee. He saw the woman who remembered his favorite book, who knew he needed tea instead of coffee, who moved through his world with a quiet strength that was beginning to feel like the only real thing in it. And in that shared, lingering gaze, both of them felt the undeniable, terrifying truth. The carefully constructed walls between their worlds were beginning to crumble. The silence in the penthouse had changed. It was no longer the serene, professional quiet that Olivia Miller had so carefully curated for months. It had become a living thing, a dense, charged field of energy that crackled in the space between her and Ethan Thorne. The vast, sun-drenched rooms, once a symbol of minimalist peace, now felt like a stage where a single wrong move could shatter a fragile truce. Olivia moved through the space with a new, almost painful self-awareness. She could feel his eyes on her, not with the detached observation of an employer, but with an unnerving focus that made the skin on the back of her neck prickle. When she polished the immense glass wall overlooking Central Park, she could see his reflection in it, standing in the doorway of his office, watching. He would say nothing, and she would say nothing, but the unspoken dialogue was deafening. Ethan, for his part, found himself manufacturing reasons to exist in the same space as her. He would bring his laptop to the long marble island in the kitchen while Olivia prepared his morning coffee, pretending to review market analytics while he was actually studying the deft, graceful way her hands moved, the faint line of concentration between her brows. He learned the rhythm of her breathing, the soft, almost inaudible sigh she would let out when she thought he wasn't paying attention. These small, intensely human details were dismantling the billionaire piece by meticulous piece. The woman who had been a seamless, invisible part of his life's machinery had suddenly become its most unpredictable, most compelling variable. He was a man who traded in data and certainties, yet he found himself utterly captivated by a mystery he couldn't solve, a presence that was recalibrating his entire world. One afternoon, a week after this new, tense quiet had descended, the breaking point arrived. It came not with a crash, but with a hesitant knock on the open door of his home office. Olivia stood there, a vision of professional poise, yet something in her posture was different. Her shoulders were held a fraction tighter, and her hands were clasped in front of her, a gesture so uncharacteristically nervous it immediately put Ethan on high alert. "Mr. Thorne," Olivia began, her voice softer than usual. "I apologize for the interruption. I have a question if you have a moment." Ethan swiveled in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Of course, Olivia. What is it?" She took a hesitant step into the room, a space she had only ever entered to clean or to place a fresh bottle of water on his desk. She was holding two simple dresses draped carefully over one arm. One was a modest, dark navy sheath dress, elegant in its simplicity. The other was a more cheerful floral print, with soft shades of lavender and sage green. She held them up, the fabrics looking fragile and out of place against the office's stark chrome and black leather. "I have been invited out," Olivia said, a faint blush creeping up her neck. "It's been a very long time, and I find myself indecisive. I was hoping for an opinion. Which one do you think is better?" The question, so innocent, so profoundly human, struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, Olivia Miller ceased to be his domestic assistant. The uniform, the professional distance, the entire carefully constructed artifice that separated their worlds simply dissolved. He saw a woman, flushed with a hopeful, nervous excitement about a date with another man. An unfamiliar and fiercely protective sensation coiled in his gut. He wasn't analyzing an employee. He was looking at a woman capable of stirring an emotion so raw and potent he hadn't realized he was capable of feeling it. He looked from the simple navy dress, which spoke of her quiet dignity, to the floral one which hinted at a brightness she kept carefully hidden. He looked at her eyes, which were wide with a genuine, guileless plea for help. And as he looked at Olivia, truly looked at her for what felt like the first time, a slow, undeniable smile spread across his lips. It was an expression he couldn't control, a genuine crack in the stoic facade he had maintained for years. The moment stretched, thick with a new and terrifying possibility. He should have given a polite, non-committal answer. He should have pointed to one of the dresses, said something encouraging, and sent her on her way. It would have been the correct, logical, and safe thing to do. But logic had fled the room, breaking every protocol, shattering the invisible wall between them with 7 quiet words. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice a low, sincere murmur that cut through the silence. "Oh, you really don't see that I like you?" The words hung in the air, echoing off the polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, changing the very axis of their story. The hopeful blush on Olivia's face vanished, replaced by a stark, chalky white. She recoiled, taking a sharp step back as if he had physically struck her. Her eyes widened, not with dawning affection, but with pure, unadulterated panic. The colossal, unbridgeable social chasm between them yawned open, a terrifying reality she had spent her entire career navigating with careful deference. He wasn't just a man, he was Ethan Thorne. He was power, wealth, and a world so far removed from her own that his confession felt less like a romantic declaration and more like a catastrophic breach of the natural order. It was a transgression that could cost her not just her job, but her reputation, her entire livelihood. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne," Olivia stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. The dresses slipped from her arm, falling in a soft heap on the floor. "I shouldn't have. I apologize for bothering you." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and fled, her hurried footsteps echoing down the long, empty hallway, the sound a painful, frantic retreat. Ethan shot to his feet, his mind reeling, the smile wiped clean from his face, replaced by a look of dawning horror. "Olivia! Wait!" he called out, his voice sounding foreign and clumsy in the suddenly cavernous space. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" But she was gone. He stood alone in his office, the 2 dresses lying discarded on the floor like a silent accusation. The navy and the floral, symbols of a life she was trying to live outside these walls, a life he had just inadvertently thrown into chaos. He instantly, profoundly regretted his candor. He had seen a moment of pure, unguarded vulnerability, and in a fit of selfish honesty, had weaponized it, terrifying the one person who had managed to bring a sliver of genuine warmth into his cold, orderly existence. The penthouse once again was silent. But this was a new kind of silence. It was the agonizing quiet of a chasm that had just been ripped open, a profound and painful distance that felt in that moment utterly and hopelessly impossible to cross. The silence that followed Ethan's confession was not empty. It was a physical presence, a dense, suffocating weight that settled over the penthouse and pressed the air from their lungs. Olivia retreated into a fortress of professionalism so rigid it was a form of armor. She performed her duties with a chilling, mechanical precision, her movements exact but devoid of the quiet soul that had once warmed the sterile spaces. The orchids were watered on schedule, the coffee brewed to the precise degree, but the gentle, unspoken courtesies vanished. There were no more mugs of chamomile tea left on his desk during late nights, no new books appearing on his nightstand. It was as if a light had been extinguished, leaving Ethan to navigate the familiar shadows of his own grand, lonely existence. He tried at first to feign indifference, immersing himself in quarterly reports and market projections, but the loss was a constant, aching thrum beneath the surface of his thoughts. The absence of her quiet presence was louder than any argument, more unsettling than any failed acquisition. He would find himself glancing up from his screen, expecting to see her, only to be met with the cold reflection of the city lights in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The penthouse, once a sanctuary of ordered calm, now felt like a gilded cage, and he was rattling its bars. The breaking point came one evening, nearly a week into their suffocating standoff. Driven by a desperation he didn't fully understand, Ethan abandoned his office and walked into the kitchen, a space he typically only entered to retrieve something from the refrigerator. Olivia was there, meticulously polishing the stainless steel countertops, her back to him. He cleared his throat. I was thinking of making dinner." Olivia froze for a fraction of a second before turning, her expression a blank mask of professional neutrality. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. What would you like? I can prepare it for you immediately." "No," Ethan said, the word coming out faster, more forcefully than he intended. "I mean, I want to make it. For us." A flicker of disbelief crossed her face before it was smoothed away. "That is not necessary, sir. It is my job." Ignoring her, he opened the refrigerator with an air of feigned confidence, pulling out eggs, cheese, and a carton of milk. He was a man who could command boardrooms and sway international markets with a single phone call, yet he felt a surge of genuine panic staring at the pristine induction cooktop. His attempt at an omelette was a disaster of cosmic proportions. He cracked the eggs with too much force, sending shards of shell into the bowl. He whisked them with a fork so violently that yellow splattered across his $1,000 shirt. The pan was too hot, the butter burned instantly, and when he poured the egg mixture in, it sizzled and smoked with an alarming ferocity. Within minutes, the piercing shriek of the smoke alarm filled the vast, echoing space. Ethan swore, waving a dish towel uselessly at the detector on the ceiling as smoke billowed around him. It was a complete, unmitigated failure. And it was in that moment of chaotic humiliation that something finally broke. From across the kitchen, a sound bubbled up, soft at first, then uncontrollable. Olivia was laughing. Not a polite titter, but a genuine, full-throated laugh, her hand covering her mouth as her shoulders shook. The sound was like water in a desert. It cut through the wail of the alarm and the tension that had held them captive for days. Ethan stopped waving the towel and just stared at her, a slow, sheepish grin spreading across his face. The alarm finally silenced, and in the ringing quiet that followed, the spell was broken. Olivia's laughter subsided into a warm smile, her eyes shining with an emotion he hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity. "I think," she said, her voice still trembling with amusement, "that perhaps you should stick to running your company, Ethan." It was the first time she had used his first name without the formal prefix. The sound of it on her lips was a quiet revelation. In that shared, smoky moment of failure, she began to see him not as Mr. Thorne, the untouchable billionaire, but as Ethan, a man profoundly lonely, capable of making a mess, and trying in his own clumsy, sincere way to connect. A fragile bridge began to form over the chasm of silence. Yet for Olivia, this newfound intimacy was as terrifying as it was tender. The closer she felt to him, The more impossible their situation seemed. How could this ever work? The judgment of the world, the whispers, the sheer unscalable wall of their different realities, it was too much. Convinced that her dismissal was not a matter of if, but when, she made a quiet, heartbreaking decision. She would leave. She would resign before he had to fire her, preserving what was left of her dignity and sparing them both the inevitable, painful conclusion. She was in her small, neat room, carefully folding her uniforms into a suitcase, when he appeared in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his tie was gone, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked less like the CEO of Thorn Global, and more like the man who had set off the smoke alarm. His eyes fell on the open suitcase, and a look of raw, unshielded panic crossed his face. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low and strained. Olivia didn't look at him, focusing on the crisp fold of a blouse. "I'm packing, Mr. Thorn. I believe it's for the best. I'll have my resignation letter on your desk in the morning." "No," he said, stepping into the room. He took the blouse from her hands, his fingers gently closing around hers. "Don't call me that, and you're not leaving." She finally met his gaze, her own eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I have to. This is impossible. We both know it." "The only thing that's impossible," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, full of an unwavering, desperate sincerity, "is going back to the way things were before. Olivia, I've spent my entire life acquiring things. Companies, properties, assets. And none of it means anything next to the quiet way you made this place feel like a home. I don't want an employee." He paused, his thumb tracing a slow circle on the back of her hand. "I want a partner." The words settled in the space between them, a quiet, profound promise that held more weight than any business contract. But their private resolution was destined for a public crucible. The annual Thorn Global Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the New York social calendar, a glittering affair at the Plaza Hotel where fortunes were pledged and reputations were made. Ethan insisted Olivia attend not as staff, but as his guest. Dressed in an understated but breathtakingly elegant midnight blue gown he had chosen for her, Olivia felt like an imposter, a dove in a den of exquisitely dressed wolves. The air crackled with power, wealth, and the silent, sharp-edged judgments of the city's elite. As Ethan was being called to the podium to deliver his keynote address, his mother, Eleanor Thorne, swept towards their table. She was a vision of old money perfection, her smile as dazzling and as cold as the diamonds at her throat. She ignored her son, her gaze landing on Olivia with surgical precision. "Olivia, dear," Eleanor began, her voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, a masterclass in public humiliation. "You have been such a wonderful help to Ethan, so diligent." She let the word help hang in the air, laden with condescending implication. Then, with a dismissive, almost imperceptible wave of her hand, she delivered the final blow. "Be a dear and fetch me a glass of the Bollinger Rosé from the bar. They never serve it at the tables unless one insists." A wave of mortification washed over Olivia, hot and stinging. The polite chatter at the nearby tables died. All eyes were on her. She was the help, put back in her place. Her training, her ingrained instinct to serve, to de-escalate, to comply, took over. She felt herself begin to nod, to rise from her chair, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. But she never made it to her feet. "Olivia, don't move." The voice was Ethan's, amplified by the microphone still clipped to his lapel, booming through the grand ballroom sound system. Every head in the room snapped towards the stage. Ethan had stopped his own introduction. He was looking directly at his mother, his expression a mask of cold fury she had never seen before. Then his gaze shifted to Olivia, and it softened with an infinite, protective tenderness. He stepped down from the podium, walking with calm, deliberate steps to their table, the entire room held in a state of suspended, breathless shock. He took Olivia's hand, helping her to her feet, not as a servant, but as an equal. He turned to face the stunned crowd, the television cameras zooming in on them, capturing every nuance of the unfolding drama. "My mother," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "is correct about one thing. Olivia has been a help. In fact, she has been my greatest help. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Many of you know me as a man of numbers, of logic, of cold, hard data. You see Thorn Global, and you see profit margins and stock prices, but you don't see the human cost. I didn't. Not until Olivia. It was her quiet strength, her profound kindness, and her perspective on a world I had long forgotten how to see, that organized not just my home, but my heart. He looked directly at his aghast mother. The philanthropic initiative I was about to announce tonight, a multi-billion-dollar fund for accessible housing and dignified work programs, was not my idea. It was hers. It was sparked by her observations, by her integrity, by watching her work tirelessly without ever asking for recognition. She didn't just inspire it. She is its very soul. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The whispers turned to stunned silence. Ethan turned back to Olivia, his eyes holding hers, the entire world falling away until it was just the two of them. "Tonight, I am not just asking for your support for this initiative," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that captivated every person in the room. "I'm asking for your witness to a promise." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Olivia Miller, you showed me the true value of a human life. Will you share yours with me? Will you marry me?" For a moment, the only sound was the frantic clicking of 100 cameras. Eleanor Thorne's face was a study in defeated fury, and Olivia, tears streaming down her face, tears of shock, of vindication, of overwhelming love, could only nod. What Ethan Thorne did that night shocked everyone. He had taken a moment of calculated public cruelty and transformed it into a breathtaking declaration of love, a powerful act of redemption that elevated the invisible and honored the worthy. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the silence finally broke, and the room erupted in a roar of genuine, thunderous applause that felt like a validation, a victory for every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they didn't belong. Their story, born in the quiet corridors of a penthouse, had just been broadcast to the world, a testament to a love that had the power to not only change two lives, but to challenge the very foundations of the world they lived in. The roar of applause was a tidal wave, washing over the grand ballroom of the plaza, but for Olivia Miller, it was a distant, muffled sound as if she were hearing it from underwater. The flashing of 100 cameras created a galaxy of miniature, blinding suns that danced in her tear-filled vision. She felt Ethan's hand, warm and steady, holding hers, the simple, elegant ring on her finger, an anchor in the dizzying storm of the moment. Her gaze drifted past him to Eleanor Thorne, whose face was a masterpiece of controlled fury, her perfectly manicured composure, the only thing holding back a torrent of aristocratic rage. The public humiliation she had intended for Olivia had ricocheted back with cataclysmic force, and her defeat was now a spectacle for the entire world to witness. The journey from the gala back to the penthouse was a blur of shouting reporters and popping flashbulbs. Ethan moved with a calm, protective authority she had never seen before, one arm wrapped firmly around her, as he guided her through the chaos to their waiting car. Inside, the sudden silence of the leather-lined interior was more deafening than the noise outside. Neither of them spoke. Olivia simply looked down at the ring, a delicate platinum band with a single, clear diamond that seemed to absorb and reflect the passing city lights. It wasn't a trophy, it was a promise made in front of millions. Back in the vast, quiet expanse of the penthouse, the place that had once been her workplace and his solitary fortress, the reality of the night began to settle. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound sense of awe and a tremor of fear. "Olivia." Ethan's voice was low, cutting through the silence. He had shed his jacket and loosened his tie, looking less like the CEO of Thorn Global and more like the man who had burned dinner just a week ago. Are you okay?" She looked up at him, at the genuine concern etched into his features. "I don't know what I am," she answered honestly, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything. It's all changed in a single moment." He closed the distance between them, stopping just before her. "Only the things that needed to," he said gently. He reached out, not to hold her, but to gently touch the ring on her finger. I meant every word, not just the proposal, everything, about you being the inspiration, about you organizing my heart. That was the truest thing I've ever said on a stage. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, cathartic release. For years, she had moved through the world unseen, her worth measured only by her efficiency and her silence. Tonight, Ethan had not just seen her, he had announced her value to the world, tying his own legacy to hers. "What about your mother?" she asked, the practical worry surfacing. "What about your board, your world?" "My world just got infinitely better," he stated, his conviction unwavering. "As for my mother, she will have to adjust to the new reality. This is my life, Olivia, and for the first time I feel like I'm actually living it." The call from Eleanor came the following afternoon, as predicted. Ethan took it in his office, but his voice was firm enough for Olivia to hear from the living area. There was no shouting, just the cold, cutting precision of two strategic minds at war. He was calm, resolute, and utterly immovable. He spoke of love, respect, and partnership, words that held little currency in his mother's world of mergers and social alliances. He ended the call not with an apology, but with a simple statement: "Olivia is my future. You can either be a part of it, or you can watch it from a distance. The choice is yours." When he emerged from the office, a weight seemed to have been lifted from his shoulders. He had finally severed the gilded puppet strings. The media frenzy, of course, was relentless. Headlines screamed about the billionaire and the help, the Cinderella story of the century. Some were cynical, others romanticized it beyond recognition. But Ethan and Olivia ignored it all. They built their new reality not in the public eye, but in the quiet moments. They cooked together, and this time nothing burned. He taught her how to play chess, and she, in turn, taught him the simple joy of watching a foreign film with no agenda other than to enjoy the story. She spoke of her childhood, her struggles, the quiet resilience that had defined her life. He spoke of his own loneliness, the crushing weight of expectation, the suffocating isolation of a life where every relationship was transactional. They were not a billionaire and his former assistant. They were simply Ethan and Olivia, two people who had found in each other a solace they never thought possible. True to his word, Ethan's transformation was not just personal, it was professional. The philanthropic initiative, now officially named the Olivia Miller Foundation for Dignified Living, was fast-tracked with his full resources. One morning, he asked her to join a preliminary board meeting. She was terrified, feeling like an imposter among the sharp-suited executives and seasoned non-profit consultants. They spoke in acronyms and financial projections, discussing housing initiatives in terms of units and cost per square foot. Olivia listened quietly for nearly an hour before Ethan turned to her. "Olivia, what do you think?" he asked, his question silencing the room. All eyes turned to her. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "You're talking about housing units," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "But you're not talking about homes. You've planned for efficiency, but not for community. People who have struggled don't just need a roof over their heads, they need to feel safe. They need green space for their children. They need access to reliable transportation so they can hold a job. They need a laundromat on site, so a mother doesn't have to choose between watching her baby and having clean clothes." She spoke for 5 minutes, not from a spreadsheet, but from lived experience, from a place of profound empathy. When she finished, the boardroom was silent. One of the consultants, a woman with graying hair and a skeptical expression, slowly began to applaud. Soon, the entire room joined in. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a love and pride so immense it felt like a physical presence in the room. In that moment, Olivia wasn't just his fiancée, she was a leader, her voice and her value undeniably recognized, her quiet strength now a powerful force for change. In the months that followed, their new reality took shape. They were a team. He navigated the corporate complexities, and she provided the human compass that guided their mission. Eleanor Thorne remained distant, a frosty silence her only response. But the world around them began to see the truth. They saw the genuine joy in Ethan's eyes, a light that had never been there before. They saw the quiet confidence with which Olivia now carried herself, her insights shaping a foundation that was already making a tangible difference in thousands of lives. One evening, months after the gala, they stood on the penthouse balcony once more. The city lights glittered below, a carpet of fallen stars stretching to the horizon. It was the same view, the same two people, but an entire universe had shifted between them. The air was no longer thick with unspoken rules and social chasms, but with the easy, comfortable silence of two people who belonged together. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The quiet? The order?" Ethan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "My life wasn't quiet, Olivia. It was silent. You brought the music." He looked out at the sprawling metropolis, a kingdom he had inherited but had never truly ruled. "I used to look out at all of this and see assets, liabilities, a balance sheet of power. Now, I see people. I see homes. I see possibilities." He turned to face her, his gaze holding the depth of his transformation. "You taught me that true value isn't something you can own, it's something you share. The greatest investment I ever made was the moment I finally allowed myself to see the incredible woman who was right in front of me all along." Their love story, born in the quiet spaces between unspoken kindnesses, had become a testament not to a fairy tale, but to something far more powerful. The radical idea that a person's worth is not defined by their station, but by the content of their heart. And in finding each other, they discovered that the greatest treasure in a world obsessed with wealth was the profound, immeasurable, and life-altering fortune of being truly seen.